Hi everybody, welcome back to the Montessori Project. I want to thank everybody who's been watching and commenting. I really appreciate hearing from you and your feedback on the videos we're doing. I wanted to take a moment to talk with you about Maria Montessori's vision for peace, especially in the season when we are welcoming and celebrating the birth of Jesus, who we call the Prince of Peace. Montessori had a very deep faith and very deep spirituality. She was very mystical. She was also an anthropologist at the time when anthropology was just developing as a discipline. And so her understanding of peace and what makes for peace didn't just have a religious dimension to it. It was a very human dimension because anthropology is just the study of man, of humankind, just the way theology is the study of God. Anthropology is the study of human beings. And so Maria was very intrigued by human behavior and the ways in which we relate to one another peacefully, and how do you structure environments for peace, and then what makes for violence, what happens to a community when violence erupts in it, and how can you, and her big program for peace, of course, was how can you have an education program that supports the development of more peaceful people and more peaceful communities. So that's what I want to look at today with you by looking at a story that's part of the Christmas story in the Gospels, but one that we don't hear very often because it's very violent. This is the story of King Herod and what's known as the massacre of the infants, or the innocents, it's often called. I'm reading with you from my Bible. The New Revised Standard Version is the translation that I use. You probably know there's lots of translations of the Bible out there, but this is the one I'll be following with you. And it is the story of King Herod and the Magi, who we also are known as the three kings or the three wise men. So let's just sort of read through it together and see if we can read through the eyes of an anthropologist. How Dr. Montessori might have read this text, looking for clues or insights into patterns of peaceful interactions among humans and patterns of violence. Okay, because she would read a text like the Bible and she was looking for truth in it, right? Not just truth about God, but truth about human beings. They say every theology has an anthropology that goes with it, which I always find very intriguing. So let's look for the anthropology in this story. So this is from the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 2, and I'm going to read the first 6 verses for you, just to remind you of this story. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men or magi from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay him homage." I want to actually stop after verse 2 there and just comment on the wise men or the magi. They're identified here as astrologers, right? So they were wise men, or magi were men who studied the stars and who knew the patterns of the stars. They were the scientists of their time, and actually knowledge of the night sky and the stars was pretty good. They didn't know necessarily about orbits and planets and so forth, of why the movements went the way they went, but they knew about movements, that some stars moved. Those are what we now call the planets, right? I think they called them planets too. But they knew the night sky well enough to know when something weird was happening in the night sky, right? So they saw this anomaly, this star. Some people today think it might have been a comet. If you're looking for a scientific explanation, that could be one. But what I want to point out is that the wise men were educated and pretty scientific. So I don't want to dismiss their interpretation of the event. I don't want to dismiss them as ignorant or just religious fanatics or something because of their interpretation that the event was a sign of something. I want you to understand they were very reasonable, rational, critical thinkers, right? So here they are wandering around Jerusalem saying, hey guys, where's this king, right? So word of this gets to King Herod. So when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it was written in the prophets. So Herod calls together his wise men, right? His people who can read the signs of the times. We might call them pollsters nowadays, people who take the pulse of the people and read the signs of the times and try and predict what's going to happen. So his people came together and said, we think if there's a king born, it's going to be in Judea. Now, why was Herod afraid? Okay, now here is the contrast between Herod and the Magi, which is a very human story. It's about human behavior. You don't have to invoke God or any theology to understand what's going on here, right? Herod is the king of the Jewish people at the time, and he feels threatened by a prophecy that another king is being born, just the way, a candidate running for office who's leading in the polls will be threatened by someone who seems to be trending upward and catching up with them, right? So Herod was a little fearful for his position. The Magi, on the other hand, were not threatened at all by the appearance of a new king. They were maybe kings in their own right. This child that was going to be born, they recognized as someone who would be greater than they. In many ways, probably smarter, wiser, maybe more equipped to rule than they were. But they weren't threatened by him, interestingly. What was their reaction? Was to come and pay him homage, to worship, right? So we have two different reactions to the same news, that a new king is being born. They're not arguing about the interpretation of the omen. Everyone agrees this is an omen of something great. Someone great is being born. The question that we're seeing in the text is, how do we react to it? What's the human response to knowing that greatness is coming? Herod reacts out of rivalry and fear, and the Magi react in a spirit of welcoming that which is new, that they don't maybe understand and that will be greater than they, right? So, oh Herod. So when Herod heard that the prophecy was that the king would be born in Bethlehem, he secretly summoned the wise men, the Magi, and he learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may go and pay him homage. Herod's lying. Herod does not want to worship this child. He wants to kill him. Okay? So, but the Magi don't know this yet. So when they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. So they're finally at the end of their search for the new king. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. So here we see again this response of the Magi to the news of the child. It's worship, it's giving gifts, hopefully gifts that they think will be welcomed by the child and the family, that will help them flourish, and even gifts for this child to know who he will be, because the Magi gave him gifts that were associated with kingship, but also with burial and mourning. So the Magi are honoring this child and also giving him some insight into who he is and what his life will be like. And then they return home. Okay, they want nothing more than to have seen him and given him gifts. Herod, on the other hand, has other plans. And the text tells us that Joseph, Mary's husband, is warned in a dream that Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And the angel tells Joseph to take his family to Egypt. Okay. So, when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men leave and don't tell him where the baby is, he was infuriated. And he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. It's a very sad part of the Christmas story. Rachel weeping for her children. Rachel was a way of referring to the whole people of Israel. So all the people were in grief because Herod, in his rage and his fear and worry that he would be usurped by this baby, has all babies under 2 killed. All the children under 2 years old killed. We don't hear the story very much because of the violence in it, but I think it's very important for us to look at it and look at it through the eyes of an anthropologist and not just through religious eyes. So Maria Montessori, the anthropologist, would have looked at this and seen a story about human nature and what leads to violence. And she would have seen a story, in this story, a warning about getting caught up with envy and rivalry and grasping onto power and holding it onto it so tight that you would kill children in order to keep your position, right? So she would see that, and she would look at the world around her and say, you know what? Yeah, that's kind of how things are. It's kind of how things work. When you grasp after power, when you're fearful of your position, and when you see others as rivals, that's when you're going to be tempted to be violent, right? When she saw the alternative path open to us, offered by the Magi, when you're not fearful of your position, when you're not in rivalry with those who may be greater than you, when you can honor them and respect them and pay them homage for who they are and what they're bringing into the world, you react with joy, with peacefulness, and compassion. So she saw this story showing these two pathways for human interactions and behavior, and she saw truth in it. And I think when we look around at our world today, we can see the truth in it too, in evidence in contemporary situations. Um, but this is a religious story, and so Maria also agreed with the religious claim here that's being made by the gospel writer Matthew. Matthew is saying, look, there's lots of ideas about who God is and who we should worship out there. Herod is worshiping a God that he thinks is on his side, right? But Matthew and the early Christians were making a claim that the God that was revealed in Bethlehem at the birth of this child is a God that is humble, appears to be weak in the eyes of the world, a helpless child, and yet it is the path to peace that's being offered. This baby is called the Prince of Peace for a reason, because he's offering what the gospel writer is trying to tell us is a path to peace that we don't always recognize, but that was revealed to us at the birth of this new baby. So what I want to emphasize here at the end is that Maria Montessori's vision for peace was what I call a practical vision, right? She believed that peace was possible, that humans could live in peace together, and she saw that there were very practical ways to go about creating peace and also raising up people who were not so prone to envy, not so prone to rivalry and grasping after power, who could be brought up in a way in which their sense of themselves was more secure, that their needs were more satisfied, so that they didn't have to, grasp and grab for things that other people had. So this was how her education system became to be focused on this bigger vision than just educating young children. She saw her system of education, as a way that opened up the possibility for all of us to be much more like the Magi than we are like King Herod. So I hope that you saw something new in this story about the murder of the infants and the contrast between Herod and the Magi, and that you find hope for peace this Christmas, and that your family celebrations and gatherings are filled with joy. God bless you and Merry Christmas.